Hello, I think we're live here. Welcome, however many are watching. Um, I am Kyle Cordes. We all work at Oasis Digital. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Paul Spears.
Chris Harden.
And this is our approximately every other week talk show. The schedule has been a little bit unreliable this summer. I expect we'll probably be unreliable in future summers also. But as usual, we're going to start with some sort of small topics. Then we're going to get to our big topic. Our big topic is code review. We're going to talk all about code review and maybe come up with some contentious, strong points of view on aspects of code review. But for our little kind of small things to talk about first, over the weekend, I was upgrading something to use the latest version of NX, and I got an error from deep inside, which I found someone else has already reported on their issue tracker, and I worked around it with a so-called monkey patch, a little bit of code that edits the JavaScript code in my node modules directory. It's not the first time I have done that to work around a problem with some library. I usually do that only if it's a hopefully very short-term kind of just measure to keep going and not become too distracted by by dependencies that have some glitch they're working through. Other than the obvious take that this is a terrible thing to do, do we have any other thoughts on monkey patching the code in node modules to get past the problem of the day? I think
I don't know.
Paul groaned when I talked about it.
Yeah, whenever I saw you open up that node modules file and start to head into there, I facepalm like, oh no, I know where this is going. Like surely this can't be the answer to our problems today. I don't know. Like where does monkey patching code live in your repository? Like is it something that you put alongside your application files? Like how do you even like maintain the code that performs such a monkey patch?
I mean, to me, hopefully it's short-lived code that does a small thing. So typically somewhere either at the top of your projects or in some sort of directory with other utilities, I would have a JavaScript program which when run goes and performs the necessary updates to the node modules directory. And then I would just call that in a post-install script. Now, amazingly enough, there are others who have much more in-depth solutions. I'm not remembering the name of the package, but there's a package that I've seen used, actually seen used as part of some Bazel efforts, that is used to maintain a set of patches that will get applied. So you put this package in your dependencies, you call this package's executable in your post install, and then you can define a directory full of patches that will get installed into node modules post install. And I think those are just patches in the normal, patch file from source control sense.
So when you say patch, are you like actually like loading in the code like and actually kind of modifying the objects, or are you actually modifying the file?
Modifying the file, because I'm talking about code that runs once briefly, and then then it's going to modify code that will run many times as you work on the software at design coding time or runtime. So yeah, just like a search and replace. In my case, there was one literal object. I search and replace it with a different literal object to get past a problem of the day.
Interesting. I guess in the past when I've had like a problem with, say not NX, that's kind of a big deal. But like if it's some like random little library you're using for like one little thing, then I just end up with like a folder called vendor or something. I just literally pull in their source and then just assume responsibility for it instead of.
Yeah, I think that's like the bigger thing. If you expect to have like a long run major change, I think vendoring in the thing you're going to edit probably makes a lot more sense. Whereas, yeah, and the thing I'm talking about is when you like, I fully expect that a few weeks from now there'll be some version, few weeks or less. I mean, it could be literally by now. I haven't looked today, but I expect this is the sort of thing that unless it's some really weird thing that only I hit, even though I hit it on a fresh project, I fully expect within the next 2 weeks it will be fixed upstream. I'll upgrade, and I'll just delete the thing that I did. And I think that it's more suitable to do strange things if you're going to do that, and less suitable for something long-lived.
Yeah, I
That's
wonder
all
how
good.
you'd.
Are you sold on it, Paul? Are you more acceptable now that
I mean, sure. I don't know. It kind of falls into that weird category of like, how hard do you push to like move to the latest edge? You know, is it worth it to migrate forward if you have to like take on responsibility with these monkey patches?
I had read the changelog, and although I don't remember now, there were a whole bunch of like fixes to things and improvements. And like, I would kind of like all those improvements. Secondly, this is a project where I wanted to experiment with the thing where you can split your workspace into many small files instead of one gigantic file. And I wanted to be on the latest to use such a cutting edge feature. I didn't want to be 6 months back, and I don't even know if it existed. I don't even know if the capability existed on the version I was upgrading from. Anyway, so I will continue to monkey patch, but hopefully only small things. If anybody catches me doing some massive search and replace edit on some imported code,
I mean,
maybe I should stop.
would you categorize what Angular does with the NGCC compiling its own library to your node modules folder? Would you consider that in the same vein of monkey patching things?
I mean, yeah, I'd say that's much further down the same road. The code that comes in is not right, so I'm going to run a tool that post-processes it to make it right. I mean, that's probably 1,000 times as much effort as the thing I did, or 10,000 times. But yeah, it's not wholly different.
So really, you're like in the same vein as like the Angular team. So you must be onto something good here.
I will not go that far. But okay, next small topic we had on our list: rocket tourism. A bunch of people flew to space for fun. Anybody bought a ticket yet?
I mean,
Claustrophobic.
I'm still waiting for tickets to like get into Yellowstone. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get one for space anytime soon.
That's firmly in the maybe someday for very long off versions of someday category.
I don't know. I like the idea, but by the time it would be possible at all, it's just I will be old enough at that point where I'm just like, you know what, I'm good to stay here for the remainder.
I mean, it's like I don't remember the details, but like one of them is like a 5-minute ride, and the other is like 12 minutes. I mean, it's not very long. It's a very brief journey, at least what's currently contemplated. Up and back down. Gravity limits the length of your journey severely. Okay, we had one more topic of a small topic. Paul, you want to talk about like recruiting remote people, something like that?
Well, yeah, we were just discussing the other day how, like, with the change in all of the company policies at large corporations around, work from home versus, coming in and shared spaces, and like nearly every policy I've heard, like if you don't have like full allowance for and full support for remote working, like every other alternative I've heard has some major downside to it that is like strictly beneficial to the company and not the employees. And as a result, we got like tons of folks that are like looking for jobs that are not at their former employers anymore.
I mean, that's what I'm seeing on Twitter. So many people. And yeah, the number one most popular driver seems to be boss wants me to show up 3 to 5 days a week, and I don't like that anymore.
Right. Well, last year has proven that it holds no value whatsoever for certain categories of companies.
I mean, no value is a big stretch, but among the trade-offs, yeah, it's a big thing to ask, especially if you're hoping to recruit like companies that are in large metro areas where the people they're trying to recruit, they might be trying to pitch them on a 45-minute commute each way. I mean, you better have something amazing to offer someone if if what you're looking for is them to spend an extra hour and a half in the car each day versus another job they could take.
Well, and it's for a lot of those folks, it's become clear that like, oh, my commute is my effort and time lost.
Yeah.
And that is free labor that the employer is getting out of me in a sense.
Well, it's the problem is that it's waste, right? Nobody's getting it. It's a substantial cost that's being paid of hours you can never get back, and it's not making value for anybody. And so nobody wants to pay for something that's not getting value, right? Like nobody's interested in taking a pay cut, right? Whereas nobody's like, oh, I'm gonna like pay more than whatever the market is because I want people who are willing to spend 14 hours a week in the car. And like, not many companies are interested. A lot of companies are like, oh, I want people that'll come in the office all the time. And it's like, really, do you want to pay more because people are going to have to spend 14 hours a week in the car? No, not like that,
The energy of the cost of the car, and places like here that St. Louis, they don't have good transportation. Like you got to pay for gas, and you got to pay for the miles on the car, and all that.
So St. Louis is actually not that bad of a place, right? Because there, for people that want to and need to work in person, it's generally not horribly uneconomical to live within a reasonable distance in St. Louis. Now, I guess the context is that like we've been a partly to mostly distributed company forever, and so other companies discovering that being distributed works, it's like, well, welcome to the party. We've been here.
Yeah. Well, and I was bringing this topic up just to point out the fact that yes, having already figured out the hybrid work mode that we have has put us in a really strong position to like take advantage of the fact that there are great candidates out there that are like no longer interested in a commute, no longer tied down to working in one location.
Definitely.
And so we're able to benefit from that reality, having positioned ourselves there before it was necessary.
I wouldn't say 15 years before the pandemic, we were thinking someday if there's ever a pandemic, wouldn't it be great to have like a distributed organization? We're not prescient. There's no prescience here, but yeah, companies that have not been able to adapt definitely have had a lot worse time of it. So, well, I guess it's been a little while. We can jump into our main topic. So our main topic for the day, code review. Everything about code review. And of course, by the nature of the work we do, we're going to bring from a point of view of how to get great results with substantial teams working on big projects. So there's probably other corners of the world of code review that we don't have a lot of experience in, but for the part that we help customers with regularly, I imagine there's probably quite a lot to say. So I will try to tick off making sure we talk about the things that we sort of promised, so to speak, on our list of bullet points. I'll kind of mark them off on my own little copy here as we cover them. And then certainly, looks like we have some viewers. So whoever's viewing, you're certainly welcome to ask questions if we don't cover something. But what's code review?
I think these days it tends to be somebody submits a pull request, and then one or more people just kind of generally are just looking it over for issues that are obvious. That's kind of what happens most of the time right now.
So I will take exception. I have been making and participating in code reviews since long before anyone said the words pull request. Mm-hmm. So one thing I have a gripe about the world of pull reviews, and I'm kind of into griping. That's kind of my curmudgeon role here. That I feel like the people who want to see the world in terms of pull requests, which is a great way to see the world, but it's not the only way, seem to be trying to like take ownership of the idea of pull review of code review. And I would say, well, yeah, code review is very relevant to pull requests, but you guys don't own the idea of code review. It is a bigger, broader older idea than the pull requests. So what else is code review? So what you said, it's like looking over code that somebody has written. Like who are the various somebodies?
I feel like, I mean, ideally you would want kind of whatever like technical lead is on the team looking for, like, you know, because there's like two main goals, like looking for issues, technical issues, style issues, things like that, anything that can't be caught by an automated tool. And then additionally, you want team members on there more for spreading familiarity with a section of code, right? So they're not necessarily there to catch something, they're there to understand, to learn from it, but also so that you have more than one person familiar with what is something doing.
So obviously, like a technical lead would be a good candidate for who to do the review. But then so then obviously other developers on a project could also do some review. Do people ever do self-review of code?
I mean, I do that before I hit the submit button.
Yeah, actually, that's like the idea of like review your own change before you commit or submit. I think that's a really powerful idea. And although I'm sure there are, many out there, maybe even among our viewers, who have also been, I've been doing that since 19 whatever. I'll point out that quite often people who work here, have introduced that idea of you ought to scrutinize your change before you commit it and or submit it to someone. We've actually introduced that to people who have found it like to be a novel idea that they had not even considered doing before.
Well, I think there's an interesting, like with the introduction of source control, I think we've kind of added a new challenge and a blocker to kind of a natural response to, oh, I should review this before I submit it. Because with something like Git, for example, as you're working, you're making many small commits over time, it becomes really, really easy and trivial to think, okay, yeah, I've got this long list of changes, and I'm just going to go ahead and merge that in and let the automated tools take care of, the basics for me. But it's easy to forget that, oh, I'm submitting this collection of commits as a single unit of work. And so unless you're really familiar with the tools and have gotten good enough to where you can easily manipulate your Git graph history, it's really easy to forget that I should be reviewing this as a holistic change and go back and manipulate the histories to see it as a single commit that I'm reviewing for all of the work that I've done.
Speaking to that, like one thing I find useful, even if you're by yourself, even if you're not on a team where you're doing pull requests and stuff, if you're using something like Git or some sort of Git thing, it can be nice to just go ahead and create a pull request just to get that consolidated history for you to review yourself, even if you're not actually going to submit that pull request to anybody. It's just like the tool does that for you. It's pulling it all together. You're like, oh, I didn't mean to commit that one file, or oh, there's this extra change there I didn't mean to. So I like to do that even if I'm not going to submit it to somebody, or if I am on a team where we're submitting it. Sometimes I always review when I'm creating it, or make a draft pull request and review that myself as well. But because it is, if you have 10 commits and it's easy for stuff to slip in there and not notice it. So I like to see what is the consolidated view of all the changes I'm about to commit to master.
So Chris, you're talking about not only self-code review, but actually kind of leveraging some of the tools that are probably designed for a different kind of code review. To get to side of, I want to look at this set of changes the way that I will eventually be asking somebody else to see what I can spot.
Yeah, and then I know, at Oasis we like to squash everything on a branch and then merge that to master. But a pull request, even if you're doing a pull request for yourself, it will do that for you. So you can review it, you can squash it. I mean, it'll automatically squash it when you merge it. So you can kind of leverage those tools to just kind of do that stuff for you.
That varies quite a bit. I think as of now, the top 2 or 3 source control, like Git-based source control tools, have finally kind of got with the program and now offer a squash rebase merge option. But until probably as early as this year, that was actually considered an oddball case by many of them, and they just wouldn't do it. But I think that those of us who are in the squash a reasonable unit of work before merging it camp have finally prevailed, and got our workflow well supported also.
Yeah, I know Bitbucket and GitHub allow that too.
Yeah,
Azure does as well.
Yeah, and so this is a slight diversion from code review, but that question of whether to preserve every incremental change as part of the eventual merge, or whether to squash the small changes and only merge like one or a small handful of big meaty commits. One of the drivers of which thing you should do is the effect it'll have on the code review process. It's certainly. Yeah, go ahead.
Even in our own internal work, we've got a couple of folks who have different opinions on that approach, and when they ask for preemptive review, kind of like as a group, they will leave the branch in whatever style they think will be more conducive for that particular review session, based on their knowledge of what's contained within it. I know Bill Odom, he's a fan of very small commits, and he will stack them up 30, 40 deep on a branch for a single change.
Yeah, and then you can like look at them in detail, right?
Change. Yep.
Yeah, you can like read the mind of the author as they made their way through by reading them, which is really cool.
Yeah. Now he is a very disciplined, very experienced developer, so there's a certain skill that you have to build over time to even to know how to preemptively shape your commit history in anticipation of that review and scrutiny from others. Not everyone can
not just preemptively, right? Like if you want to present a well-crafted set of small commits, sometimes rather than preemptively doing it, sometimes you post-emptively go back and edit your commits to break them into little chunks. The biggest obstacle I've seen is that one needs a fairly high level of fluency with Git to do that. And so the very most experienced, and masters among us can do that in a few minutes. But at the same time, I would urge caution in like trying to get folks that are only in the first 10 years of their development career to like have the level of mastery of like, I'm going to take apart these set of commits, I'm going to put them back together in a different way because now they tell the story of the development of the feature better.
Right.
I've done that a few times. It's a lot of work.
So I got a submission for another form of code review.
Yes.
Well, I've touched on it briefly, but just having a pair/mob programming session. There are times that we have said, like, this does not need additional review because as it was being authored, it had 4 different eyes on it at that exact moment in time. Yeah.
You can sort of count whoever was in the room as having pre-reviewed something to some extent. Maybe not 100% every time, but to some extent. And whether it's you could think of pair programming as one person like dynamically reviewing and then handing back and forth every 10 minutes, or every 5 minutes, or every 2 minutes, who's reviewing. Although I think some of the pair programming people would say, no, that's like a different role. One person is navigating and another is coding, but then like next week somebody else will be reviewing. So I know there's a wide range of opinions on that.
Yeah. Well, and the implementation is very widely as well.
Yeah,
like our version of mob programming that we do at the office, for example, is it's not formal mob programming where you've got your navigator and your driver and you've got the group in the back. I forgot what their role is called, but
the kind of Llewellyn Falco formalized mob programming idea.
It's not that we do, but it is more of a hey, let's all think about what we want to do, how we want to solve this. And then we kind of collectively review as we progress through each step of the development lifecycle.
I don't know if mob programming has been trademarked or whatever, but yeah, there's a difference between mob programming, maybe trademark, versus the kind of the colloquial notion of a mob, a group of more than two programming together. Maybe we should come up with a different word that's not mob. Group programming, gang programming, posse-gramming. I don't know. Okay, so some code has been written either by one, two, or more than two, and now it's sitting out there in a branch. Now there's a whole range of opinions on whether that branch should have a small number of commits or a lot of commits. Then there's another whole range of opinions on whether that branch should wait a long time or a short time before it gets merged. Right? The sort of the trunk-based development way of thinking has its trade-offs. But the point that this hits code review is, what do you think about reviewing code before it gets merged versus after it gets merged?
I don't know anyone who does after merge with a large degree of success.
You were being very Git centric here, but not everybody uses Git, and Git, other things like Perforce don't support branching in the way that Git does.
Well, every source control system I've seen has some degree of branching, but yeah, the
not
view.
in a so useful way. But like for when we were using Perforce, so
I'm not sure I want to defile Perforce too much. Are you sure it doesn't have branching? I'm pretty sure it does. I thought it did.
It's a file structure based thing. So to create a branch, you actually have a separate folder.
Is it like Subversion?
It's been so long since I used Subversion, I don't want to remember.
In Subversion, you kind of make what seems like a copy of the files to be a branch. Yeah, I spent a long time using Subversion. Yeah.
Perforce has its benefits, which is why it's used in specific industries and technology sectors that want really secure, well-defined things. I don't know. They have their reasons, but when I had to work in it, what was difficult was we didn't have any sort of branching strategy. So then they put in something to say, oh, you have to have a code review before you can commit any code at all, which means you're sitting there working on something and you got to wait for a person to physically come over to your desk, sit there with you, and tell them what your code does before you can even commit and move on to the next thing. So that was worst case.
So I don't want to slam tools out of ignorance. So instead, I'll slam teams of which I'm ignorant. So I would say if a leader has chosen a tool which doesn't make it possible for me to make some changes and stick those changes somewhere under control of that source control tool so that they can be in some kind of hopper before something further happens with them, then I would assert they have done a bad job choosing a tool. Now, I don't know whether in any specific scenario was the tool the problem, was the way the tool is configured. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of questions. So I'm not saying anything's too concrete, but generally speaking, I would say that the ability for me as any developer to make some candidate changes and stick them somewhere is that's in 2021, that's a hard requirement. If your source control tool does not have that, you should be shopping, not watching this video.
Yeah. I think things have improved since, this was a few years ago, and we did eventually get a code review tool specifically for Perforce, but to really get a good workflow for developers, we had to kind of convince the people in charge to kind of let go of that idea of pre-commit reviews and move toward post-commit reviews. That was a big deal, just so that we weren't being held up all the time. Because literally that part of our official process submitted to the FDA and all that was, we will not commit any code into source control before it is code reviewed, which is impossible to get anything done.
Yeah,
so
that's
that process changed.
I would describe that as it's a shame that someone chose to impose a process on themselves that likely both lowered their quality and lowered their productivity. That's unfortunate for all involved.
to bring your original question and Chris's scenario together, and today though, when we have Git and we have the idea of like, you can have multiple environments for your code, you can have multiple branches for your code, and what I often see is something more akin to we have things like our dev branch, our main branch, and then we have a staging build, a QA build, things like that. That we have these tiers of progression that our code travels through.
Yeah.
And so, like before or after a merge, before or after a merge to what becomes a very real question.
Right.
In some of these larger environments.
I asked it with like the simplest possible scenario that there are branches that have some length that might be little, might be huge, and they live until they're eventually merged into a main line. But yeah, there definitely could be there are companies that have 3 or more stages on the way into a main line. And so the reason I asked it though is that, I think Chris said you can't imagine, but I've actually known people who worked in operations where they did a very kind of trunk-based development, and stuff really did, in many cases, get merged and then maybe reviewed. It was almost like a drive-by review. It's like if somebody happens to see it and review it, like it was like the default is the change goes in and it's shipped, and then maybe it gets reviewed. Now, I guess you probably tell from the way I'm describing it, I don't think that's a very good idea. I think that it's safer in many ways to have the default be that the code doesn't go in into whatever your process of how many steps there are from when a code is initially committed to when it's shipped as part of a product, whether that's 1 step or 17, it seems more reasonable that things would kind of sit and wait until they can be reviewed. But of course, now I'm setting things up. Paul, I believe that you have worked with organizations that we consult for who reached pretty significant struggles because of building up a backlog of code that needed to be reviewed. So
I was going to say the question of when also depends on where you're at in the life cycle of your project.
Yeah.
Very, very early days, as usual, this harkens right back to the Angular for Architects call outs that we do all the time.
Yeah.
That particular class, one of the things we talk about is the life cycle of the software product, and not just the software development life cycle. Your product has stages of its life over time, and at the very beginning, ideally, you're only going to have a couple of architects working on it. And that idea of like a drive-by code review is much more appealing and useful in those early stages where you have very trusted, very senior people whose job it is to set the patterns of use of the framework and tools that are going to be used to build the software.
Yeah.
And so the idea of putting additional oversight over the people that have that responsibility, it is just waste at that point.
If your program is being written by one architect and there's no one else assigned to the project in any way, obviously there can't be any code review by anyone else, right? Even if there's 2 architects.
Yeah, even if it's two or three senior architects there.
You might want to proceed boldly, right? Proceed boldly for a while, and then when you reach a certain level of overall size and robustness, then you start modifying your review process just to become a little bit more cautious about change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's like all of these topics that we have on this list to talk about, like they're all fraught with, well, it depends kinds of answers that we're going to be
absolutely
dig into here.
So speaking of it depends, let me see here. So when you're going to review, we talked about like a review process. There's the idea of like maybe you're reviewing yourself as you type lines of code. Maybe you're doing a pre-commit review, right? If you have a source control system that makes branches heavy and expensive, which many older ones did. Maybe you have a review on the way to like a dev branch or a different review to a main branch. If somebody just walks in and they don't have much of a review process or culture at all, what are the things we would ask them to try to understand about their context to start making recommendations about review? Like, so you said it depends. Like, what kind of things does it depend on? Like, I know, Paul, I know that you've been the person asking these questions.
Yeah. What is the team like? Tell me about the team. Who are the people? Why are these people on this project? What are their roles on this project? The people matter a whole lot. If you're coming into an environment and you've got a team of developers who haven't been really shepherded or guided and directed in how their work is supposed to happen, and you're asking me to suddenly show up and start telling them what to do, yeah, that's not going to work so well. Like, it doesn't matter how good the advice is, if it isn't delivered well and collaboratively with buy-in from all the people that are about to be subjected to it, you're going to have a rough time getting anywhere. It can very much be an accidental us versus them when you walk into a situation and start trying to add code review to that team. Odds are that team is under direct pressure to, like, okay, where we've got a 2-week sprint and we need all of your items across the finish line of that sprint every 2 weeks. Or there'll be some sort of repercussion for it.
Right.
And there'll be the gnashing of teeth and wailing, if you fall behind on your sprint velocity. And so now I show up and I say, oh, by the way, your types aren't as strict as I'd like, and now we're gonna up the ante on that, and I'm gonna call you out on it every time. Like, that's not going to make things better. That will strictly make them worse. So to me, it starts with understanding the team, understanding the pressures, understanding the driving force for the pace of work, and then finally I start talking about the tech at that point, and who's setting the goals for the team or the organization for the tech. I can make up arbitrary goals about what I consider good code, but if when I leave no one cares to maintain them, what's that going to buy? We have to establish that shared goal, and then that goal has to be socialized into the rest of the team, and then we have to slowly start incrementing that barrier over time. So that's the flyover version of some of the stuff that I think about walking into that situation.
So I had put a couple of points on the outline here as kind of I guess the stalking horses or something about what is code review for. I had put code review as collaboration and code review as quality control. And I think Chris actually called out that primary axis in the first couple minutes of our discussion. But Paul, it sounds like you're actually pointing at kind of a different axis of code review as the venue in which to establish like a shared understanding of how we work here. Not so much to collaborate on not just collaborating on the piece of code in front of us. Is code review is where we figure out what's important to this team.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because to me, testing, whether it be automated E2E or human testing, that's where we find out if the software delivers value. That code review, that's not the purpose of code review. Code review is not to find out if this software is valuable. It is, how do we want to continue to work in this code base over time, regardless of what value is delivered. So it's obviously people think of it as like code quality and collaboration, like you were saying, but if you're going into it with I'm going to verify that this is quote unquote right, I think you're going to miss some of the more important aspects, and more importantly the opportunities and learning opportunities that you can get out of that code review session. Like, to me, the point of code review is to make sure that I can continue making commits on day n+1.
Yeah. So there's code review of just like checking that. So does this code work correctly? And it sounds like that sometimes code reviews don't even check that. Some code reviews you might not even execute the program because you might not be like, as part of code review, you might not be looking at, does this do the right thing? You might be looking at, how does this code work? But you could check for, like, correctness and, like, business value. You could check for things like style, I've heard mentioned. You could check for things like, are we moving along in a shared understanding of how we're going to do types? And of course, the context for our viewers, a lot of our work here together is in TypeScript. And TypeScript, unlike some other typed languages, has a very wide range of how typed your code has to be, all the way from you use the any type in TypeScript, and you just get a free pass to do anything you want, through a extremely rich type system, right? So like, getting the shared understanding of how typed are we going to do the code, so types. You mentioned tests. One of the things to try to, you try to, like, avoid being a jerk while writing this in a code review comment along the lines of, hey, I didn't notice the tests. Maybe you forgot to commit them?
Yeah, I used to be I used to not like the idea of code coverage on my unit tests, and I have recently started to really appreciate it, because it does allow me to better focus my code review.
Yeah.
If I know that our code base has, some crazy high 90s, plus percentage of test coverage requirement to pass, the code review, I get to almost entirely leave off the does this do what it's supposed to do part of code review.
Right. Because that's kind of been covered. Yeah.
Aside from things that would be difficult to even catch in a review anyway. Because like, if it would be easy to catch in a review, it would probably be easy to catch by way of a unit test coverage requirement.
Yeah.
But it allows me to not have to worry about, okay, I've got to make sure that this commit doesn't break everything and have everything fail, because I've got that robust unit test and ideally a stack of E2E tests that are going to follow that up as well. And so I just get to pivot to, hey, does this have the quality, shape, and structure of what I expect of our team to be able to continue to ship high quality code, like I said, on day N+1. And so that it's kind of weird how unit testing has had an impact on my code review in that way.
So, as we've said code review here repeatedly, I think we sort of, maybe accidentally, all of us, thought about code review as we're looking at a proposed change in some kind of tool and then clicking and typing some comments in. But that's actually a question, like, that's an answer, but there's really a question behind it. I've done code review that way many times, but I've also done code review in person, right? Just like sit with a person. I've also done code review in a group setting. We've had projects here, as well as I've led projects elsewhere, where part of like a daily or a couple times a week cycle was to bring up all the open branches, and then we would all review them together. Not only those that are not like as a last minute check, but just as a discussion to get shared context and understanding. And that was a form of code review. And then, although right now I think most of our teams are distributed but somewhat synchronous, in that we're all working around approximately the same hours and tend to have some meetings and that sort of thing. I have done asynchronous video screencast code reviews. So that's a pretty wide range, right? So there's asynchronous, which could be in writing or video. Then you probably wouldn't do something synchronous in writing, but you could do synchronous in person. You could do synchronous over a meeting like the one we're in here. How does all that affect code review? Like or I guess as a starting point, like, obviously we never name names, but like what range of those kind of processes are we seeing in the numerous enterprise projects that we're spread across? I see.
Chris, you got anything there?
Yeah. So, my question is, what are we seeing in our range of customer projects? Are we seeing almost entirely? I look at the change on github.com slash, whatever enterprise.github.com, and then I type some comments in. Are
Yeah.
we seeing much of like in person or live video? What are we seeing?
I mean, I most of my experience working within client teams has been for, large companies with, very distributed people in different time zones or, across the globe. So it was very much get up in the morning, open up GitHub, see what pull requests are waiting, and just go through it. Um, and with a pretty big workload, so it's kind of, you're just slogging through, trying to just skim over them all. So
So you've had almost entirely, as the producer, as the reviewer, where you are typing comments
yeah,
into a source control system, and that's across a bunch of projects.
yeah.
Right?
So then you're really kind of getting into definitely not being as in depth as you would if it was, oh, I've got a couple developers that I can sit down with and talk to, because then you're really just trying to be like, okay, how bad is this? Like, oh, it's not what I would write, but it still works. Okay, you're trying to, because you don't really have the means or time to, sit down and make somebody understand, like, well, it'd really be better if you did this completely the other way. It's like, it's good enough. It works. Nothing's going to blow up. All right,
So it sounds like a big driver of the sort of depth of a code review is just as an organization, how much of your reviewer's time are you spending on it, right? So Chris, you're talking about being in a situation where it sounds like you were in very tight supply, right? You,
Yeah,
you were probably like the reviewer of last resort, and there were a whole lot of changes, and just keeping up with them was very challenging.
yeah,
And so it sounds like a more cursory review was just necessary because like whoever's money it was, that's what they allocated time for.
right.
Now, Paul, what do we advise people on that?
Well, that is still a very hard problem to solve in general. Um, I think the general solution that we try and find is like we've got to scale. It can't just be one person.
Right.
If two things can't be one person, and we've got to automate away everything we can.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we can't be spending time with our reviewers making sure that the import list at the top of the file is ordered properly.
You got to
Like
have a tool, right?
That's ridiculous.
You got to have a tool. Like, so actually, let me tee this up. I have a strong belief. This belief has paid off for me very well across many projects, at many organizations, many projects, that the ideal is that the code in a project reaches a state where it's like as non-path dependent as possible, in that you don't like look at the body of code and know, oh, Paul wrote this in his 2018 period. Oh, Chris wrote this in her 2019 way of thinking. Oh, John wrote this when he didn't like braces, and then Kyle wrote this when he was experimenting with indentation as like an art form. I think of all of those as being very bad, and so things that so Paul, you mentioned like ordering of imports. I feel like with ordering of imports, I really don't want my team's code, the code that's trying to produce value that I'm responsible for, to contain idiosyncratic variations in import ordering based on the kind of just personal whim of who was writing it. And right. Then you pointed out, well, like managing that in code review is slow and expensive. So yeah, we need a tool. So import orders being consistent. That's one thing that can be tooled to avoid being human reviewed. What else can be tooled to avoid being human reviewed?
Unused imports. It could be obviously things like type errors, type
Yeah.
inconsistency.
Yeah. I shouldn't be reviewing code that doesn't even type check, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't even bother to review until after, like when I have a fully set up environment, like I won't even bother to review it until you get me a clean PR.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to spend my time doing that because you're going to go back and you're going to have to redo it, 5 or 6 times anyway to get through that process, and then I'll review.
And when you say clean PR, you're implying that you have a build pipeline set up on each branch that does all the things like linting and prettier check and
so lint,
and all
prettier.
That.
Yep.
Which is not a given. I mean, I think that's a must-have, but that actually seems to be quite rare to have that set up in some of the places that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, and even if even if I don't have like the ability to like flip on all the strictness on those tools, I'll still usually come in week 1 on a project and put them all in place with the sensitivity turned all the way down, and just start slowly incrementing that knob.
Yeah.
Every time I touch the code base.
Yeah, I just mean it's important to have that set up in an automated fashion, because no matter how many times I tell developers, run this script before you commit, they don't. So it has to be in the DevOps tooling.
Well, Azure DevOps is making it
process.
I used to believe that also, like, hey, here's a script, you got to run it before you push. But I tell you what, if you're on like Azure DevOps in the cloud, or you have your like Bitbucket pipelines set up in such a way where a commit will trigger a build process, and you can get that spun up and off in parallel, like it's actually a lot nicer to just leverage that system also.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, I've given up on trying to get developers to consistently do those checks themselves before commit. I think having a pipeline like that is absolutely necessary.
So I can talk a little bit about the history of that, because early in my career was when people were writing about the novel new thing of things like, ooh, we have an automated daily build. I worked at organizations where the notion of automatically running the build every single day, whether you needed it or not, was actually a major innovation. There was a point when running the build every day was a big deal. That didn't last long because computers get faster really fast. So there is actually not a very long time from when people said, oh, let's automatically build every day, to where people thought, hey, let's buy more hardware and let's run the build on every commit. Like, that's kind of the other extreme. And so, of course, I think looking at it from a 2021 perspective, anybody who hasn't caught up with, go run your build and get all those checks to happen on every commit. You're leaving money on the table if you're not doing that in 2021. But I will stand up for people who weren't doing it some years ago, because it used to be really hard and like a big deal. At one point, people had to create the first tools that did that.
Well, and container technologies.
Containers
have
helped
showed
a lot
in a big way also in this space.
Container, although this all worked before containers, but containers have made it easier and better.
Yeah, and all the Bitbucket pipelines, the DevOps pipelines, GitHub now has actions. All those things make it. Just rename your YAML file and change a few things, and you've got a pipeline set up for your Git tool.
At the more extreme case, some people actually go ahead and do a test deploy of every commit. In like web-based systems where like to deploy is just like make up a new URL and put the program there. There are folks that are deploying every commit, so you can actually go take that commit for a test drive as part of the review.
Tell you what, speaking of things that could be automated, here's a request for any of the folks at Narwhal, if they're watching. I would really love it if I don't have to chase around my team to get the names and file folder structure of my NX project to be consistent in some way. Like I actually absolutely love the architectural pattern that they put out there with their NX book. I've followed that and tried many variants on that theme. I've been in projects that follow it very closely and some that just kind of loosely emulate it to some degree. And regardless of where you're at on that spectrum, I mean, regardless at all on that spectrum, the next team member that comes along is going to be inconsistent with whatever you have there. And having to like track down and get everyone to kind of understand what the rules are, having those rules codified in some way is actually really, really hard for some reason. I don't know how Narwhal would even be able to supply us with such a tool, but hopefully if anyone's been thinking about it, it's been them.
I can riff on that a little bit, Paul. I think that this is a feature of the Angular CLI schematic system, and that the schematic system is great. I'm so happy it exists. I think it's a great innovation that was, that became part of the landscape, readily available. But I think it's missing something really important, and that schematics are all about doing something automated at the moment I run the schematic. Right. And often what I really want is I want to declare something that to be permanently true. Like the name of the thing inside the folder must always match the name of the folder. Of course when I type right now it's going to match what's in the folder, but next Tuesday the thing in the folder needs to match. Like you can't make a commit. Like you shouldn't be able to merge a commit that makes the thing in the folder not match the name of the folder. And I think that's like kind of one aspect of what you're talking about.
I really like the pattern of you have to have a library type, and it must be one of util, data access, UI, or feature. I really, really like that pattern. That has done wonders for the organization of my code bases. And like it is hard to, without having practiced it, if you're showing up new to a project using that, it's hard to know that is even a thing. Like there's no way right now to even like put that in as a hard restriction that I'm aware of. They could have it somewhere, but like that's something I would love to see mature more, is how do we encode architectural practices rather than syntactical practices in our automation tools.
So typically this would mean another kind of lint tool that could run as part of your automated builds. I don't know if that would fit kind of inside the purview of like an ESLint plugin, or if that would be a totally separate executable. But I mean, you can write arbitrary programs. So Paul, I've done versions of this in the past and with other tech stacks where there was just a script that ran and it did some grepping around to like check that some architectural constraint was still met. And it would fail the build with a message. The build fails because so-and-so constraint is not met. Things like dependencies. All the code in this folder is not allowed to even say the name of the code over in that folder because we require a strict runtime connection from A to B. We don't want any compile time connection from A to B. And so literally you can't even say its name, not even in a comment.
I don't know about the not even in a comment, but the rest of that, NX actually does support that pretty well.
Yeah,
it is mostly the naming.
Yeah, the naming thing. I think the naming thing is implemented by the schematics, but implemented only by the schematics.
To what Paul was saying with like, making sure every library has a type and that's part of the name. Also, automatically putting in a tag in the index.json.
Yeah,
helpful as well.
Yeah.
I feel like I used to pass in. I feel like a long time ago when I was first using NX, I feel like I had to pass in a flag.
There was a version that required new libraries to specify their metadata.
Yeah.
And they realized that a lot of folks weren't on board with that.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like, wait, where did it go?
Yeah, I missed that version of NX also.
Yeah.
So we would be huge fans and promoters of a future NX, I guess, feature extension, which was like workspace level cross-project lint rules. Like lint rules that aren't about like the ES-ness of it, but which are about you're required for every project to specify a type. You have to have at least one tag. You have to this sort of thing.
Yeah, like a strict mode flag.
Yeah, right. As a architecture level strict mode, a strict architect. That would be slick. Okay, so I think that ties into our next undiscussed bullet point. How picky should we be when we're doing code reviews, regardless of the mechanism by which we're doing them?
I usually tailor that to the level of my team members.
Okay, you try to help the help the person whose name is on the branch
Yeah,
you're
like,
reviewing.
I can't make every line red, It's like I'm gonna how nitpicky I get, it's like the better you are, the more nitpicky I'm gonna get. And, it's like, well, how much can you handle, right? So if you've got developers that are clearly just been thrown in, and then like my expectations lower, and I try to bring them on a little bit at a time. If they start to get better,
Right.
I get a little harder with, So
Yeah.
in the beginning, like, okay, is it going to blow up? Okay, no.
Yeah.
And then you get into, oh, you didn't quite use, this would be cleaner if you did promises a slightly different way, or this would be cleaner if you used this operator, like that's like
Yeah.
different levels of what they can handle.
Well, I think, there's a natural contention between the first criteria I use for like why I do code review at all is to ensure a high quality code base for day N+1 that runs completely counter to, I don't even say completely counter to, but definitely runs sometimes at odds with the idea of code review is actually a human process where you're trying to improve the other coders on your team. There are plenty of folks out there that have that philosophy about code review that is a process strictly for the betterment of a team rather than the quality of a product. And to a degree, I could see that as being true if your worldview of software development is confined to, I work with a team. And that's not at all how we work. We get paid to come bring our highly opinionated experience to your team and teach you how to integrate other disparate teams into your software development product. So yeah, that's a very great question on that. How picky should your code be? Because the depends there is really off the chart. I know for me, Chris, to try and meet that middle ground with what you described of, I can't just destroy this junior developer. They'll never talk to me again.
You can't literally say things wrong on every single line of the.
Right. But what do I do? How do I get this code in a state that it's okay for future developers to come behind and try and work with it? And how do I prevent? And here's the other one, is that not only are you worried about code quality versus the feelings of the people that you're working with, but you also have that third point in the triangle of, and also management wants this code to actually start shipping.
Right.
They actually need the product to get out the door. And so, what do you do then? Well, that's usually when I'll do one of two things. If they're really super junior or things are really, really bad, I'll usually just switch my code review tactic entirely and say, okay, I'm not going to go and mark this up. We're going to go ahead and get on a call. Let's discuss your code together one-on-one, and I'll show you some things about what I'd like to see, and use that as just a direct mentoring opportunity at that point, to kind of help bring them along and give them an example. And if you can, record that review session with them. That's a big pivot.
I've done that, like, I keep going back to the same experience, but like, kind of, I've been in a situation where it's like, let's say you have 10 developers, all of them are, oh, you wrote some programming language somewhere, here, you're on an Angular team now. And, some of them just don't care, and some of them do. And it's kind of like trying to figure out, the ones that actually, I feel like are actually going to benefit from my time, that actually seem receptive, then, and those are often the ones that they're going to reach out to me before they submit the pull request, and I'm happy to like do an hour pairing with them and trying to like show them how to do it best. And it's like, you can tell. And then there's the other ones that like you start to get a feel for, this guy he's not going to care. He just wants to get this through. And so then I'm like, I kind of tend to tailor my review that way as well. I'm like, okay, this is passable, or whereas it's like, oh, it's this guy. I know he wants to, I know he cares. I know he wants to like write better and better code. I'm going to spend more time. I'm going to reach out to him more because I know he's going to listen and I'm not wasting my time, you know?
So the level of investment should be apportioned to where it's going to get the greatest return, which is going to be devoting more of your review effort toward the people who will get the most payoff from it, both individually and of course the payoff of that person, caring more and doing more with it is going to turn into a payoff for the organization for which you're doing the review also, inevitably.
Another pivot that I'll sometimes make is I will intentionally hold back critique for the next round of review.
Definitely.
Here are the top 5 things that you need to go look at in this commit. And then after I'll work with them on resolving all 5 of those before introducing the next. Okay, that's great. Here's some other things that we got to work on. And that can I found that will help for folks that are kind of at that medium in that medium of they're not so junior that they can't take criticism, but they're not senior enough that I can just throw everything at them and they don't take it personally anymore. And so that's what I'll do sometimes as well, is stagger those comments on a single commit, limit their scope so they can focus on the most important bits first.
So Paul, as part of that, you're making an explicit trade-off against a different value I've heard. I've heard other people say, well, you never want to have to go back. You have failed if you have to come back again. So as a reviewer, you should try to be absolutely comprehensive. You should list everything, and if they fix everything, then the thing passes, and there'll be no further feedback. And I think your trade-off the other direction is much better, but I have heard people in organizations that go the other way.
Well, and I think the first one is unrealistic for many scenarios. The idea that you said of like, oh, you can get it all in one shot, because if they've done their job well on addressing my top 3 issues, odds are they've completely refactored things in a way where the first code review becomes obsolete.
Yeah. Your next 3 might be different because of all the improvements from the first 3.
Right.
So go ahead.
I was going to change shots on you.
Okay, well, you're probably going to change the same direction I was. So we've been kind of rubbing up against this, and now I want to get to it, which is the social interaction aspect of code reviews. And to introduce that, I want to present the worst case scenario that most people go through on their way to becoming a working adult professional, which is, don't sue me, bro, school. So in school, the cycle is work, submit, be graded, move on. Now, that's not universal, that's not every teacher, that's not every school, but that's the basic cycle. So the basic cycle that developers arriving in our industry have been through many times is, I'm going to do some work, and then I'm going to get a critique on that work, but critically, the critique on that work will be recorded for all time and will become a measure of my value as a human being. And I think that is a very bad way to run a team, even though it is practically speaking the way, school mostly works. I think the right answer is that mistakes should be encouraged, and that to me as a reviewer, somebody who hustled up and just got something out and they don't really understand very well yet and their code is bad, but they tried and they sent it for review, like the fact that I have to write 42 comments on it, like I actually think more positively of the person after I did so, not less. I think this person is awesome because they are trying. And if I write some comments and they come back and they got some of them addressed, then I'm like even more positive about that person. And so that's kind of the opposite of the sort of grading approach to code reviews. So I think it's really important, if you want code review to be a collaboration, growing, improving process, that you can't let it be like a grading process. And so, and that'll, I'm hoping that you'll have a little more to say on like kind of the social part of that. But in terms of the process, I think that's one of the things that people get to learn as they enter the professional world, which is it's kind of not like school in that you're graded on what you as a team produced at the end. You're not graded based on how perfect each individual attempt was. So what do you think?
I had never put two and two together there before, of like the reason why. You're probably exactly right. The reason why new developers will say, oh, I haven't pushed that yet because I still have to do X, Y, Z. When they first start a job as a developer, is almost certainly because of, like, even subconsciously their experience and their training of, I can't submit anything until I'm done because that first submission will be seen as my worth as a human being.
Yep, I'll be somehow my success is based on how perfect my first try was. So,
Yeah.
No, it's not how that
Plus,
works.
also, I like people to submit small iterative things.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to sit down and look through an entire feature. And by then it's too late to correct. If you've gone off in the wrong direction, it's just, get a little bit of it, get a little piece working, submit that, get a little bit more working. It's a very iterative process. Because otherwise, I'm just gonna be like, this is too much. I'm just gonna glance at it and be like, well, it is what it is.
Yeah. When you were saying like the social aspect of it,
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go more into the more, I guess, political, not social aspect of code review.
Well, it could be the same thing. Like in some organizations, I can imagine it being quite frowned on to have your code have some negative code review comments.
Yeah, I was going to talk about NX and circle back around to that, and how, like in an NX monorepo, well, I use NX because that's kind of like the most common monorepo tool that I use.
Our circle, yeah.
Yeah. But like working in a monorepo and doing code review there is a different kind of beast as well, because of these social issues. Like all of a sudden, I'm now doing code review for a junior developer on someone else's team because they've now, because I'm responsible for the health of the health and quality of the monorepo as a whole.
Yeah.
Regardless of what business line is contributing to it right now.
Right. And we say this, by Paul, because we would typically be brought in to like kind of help at the across many projects level. But I think that apply even somebody who's responsible for the code quality of a library they're working on, and then they're working in a monorepo where a developer in a different part of their organization submitted what they believe to be a bug fix in this library. And I can imagine getting into some unpleasant social or corporate politics issues could actually come up in like, what do I write in the code review? It's like, no, I realize that it might have saved you time shipping to change this to an any type, but that's not how we do it over here in the whatever department.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because a code commit could easily come in that is exactly what you said. Let's say that there's a type discrepancy. Let's say they've created their own data type to describe an API call that's made. But we also have a node project being maintained in that NX monorepo that specifies the type of the data they return. And we have developers on a team that I don't necessarily interact with other than in this code review process, who are saying this needs to go out tonight for a demo to a CEO. Like,
put it on a branch.
Who are you to prevent this from going in? Oh, no, because in our environment, only things that commit to master actually end up having a deploy. That runs as a result.
It has to be merged and shipped forever because we can't demo code we haven't shipped. Like, what?
Yep.
That's just like, okay, you do you, is all I can say to that one.
Yep. Like, and so, yeah, and all of the arguments, no matter how clear and simple and true that it is, that you need to be taking the type of this data API rather than making your own, so that way it doesn't break tomorrow when they change it.
Yeah.
Like, how can, like, the value of the code reviewer against the executive power of that business line's director.
Well, the business urgency, right?
How do you arbitrate that situation?
So I feel like those situations are often accidentally created by whoever designed the process and tooling. Because like there is a right answer to what you're saying is, and that is go find the person who made the decision that we can only do a build and demo after off code that has been merged, and fire them. That is the person that's causing the problem in your organization. That decision of we have to merge this before we can show it in a critical demo, that has numerous toxic consequences. That one is very hard to deal with. I feel like all the other things you can like come to an agreement on, as long as you can say, yeah, absolutely, do this, get this in, we're going to put this in our dev branch, but we're not going to put it to our main branch. But we're going to get it in here just so we can get this demo. As long as you have that flexibility to say, we have somewhere to put this that we can use to meet our critical business needs, then you can, like, humans can get together and they can work it out. But if there's that one person who just absolutely demands, nope, you have to merge it for real, even though you know it's wrong, because I refuse to let the system be designed to let the CEO see a version in progress, that is just, I think, is just toxic to quality. And I don't have a solution for that other than to not do it that way as a company.
Yeah, and I think part of what I've discussion I've been having a lot is getting folks who want to take on a monorepo, like the monorepo and code review, and like the quality gatekeeping. Like those three ideas are so closely intertwined, because of problems just like this. You know, at the end of the day, the code reviewers of that monorepo end up being the gatekeepers of quality, sometimes for an entire division of code.
Yeah.
And then when you're the gatekeeper, people start knocking on the gate. And things can get a little dicey. And one of the interesting things about it is that when you're in that monorepo, part of what you need to get these companies to understand is the responsibility of code review is no longer that of the senior developer. It is a collaborative process.
Yeah.
That people on all sides and teams need to have a joint responsibility in, or this will fail.
Having teams work together often means that those decisions on what we're going to accept in code review means you have to go gather the decision makers across all the constituent teams and work it out. And then everybody has to go work on, then implementing that in a reasonably consistent way.
Yeah. The idea that, I would say in that scenario that we put out there of getting that demo deployed, there were like 5 failures along the way. And I agree. The one about, you can only have one instance of the software running anywhere at any point in time, that's definitely a big one.
That's a self-goal there. That's a self-goal.
I would,
no way around it.
Yeah, I would say that there was also a failing on the part of the executive who did not take the time to understand, verify, and check the process for producing a demo in the first place.
Sure.
And created a requirement that didn't include the other, 3/4 of the development team.
Sure.
In that process.
Yeah.
I would say
responsibility flows upward, right? That's the unfortunate reality. Like if you're running an organization and you create pressures that force there to be kind of a toxic technical culture, that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. I'd say another failure point in that situation is whoever decided to switch to a monorepo in the first place without ensuring that there was education and buy-in as needed across the teams.
So this is the point where I pause to make a pitch. For anyone watching this or working in an organization that you or someone who you work for could benefit, we can help with these problems. So all this stuff, it's not just the 3 of us. There's a bunch more of us here who have been around this block and we love helping companies with this kind of problem. So I love to interject my pitch. So Chris, I'm pretty sure you have been involved in cases where you had a very high frequency of seeing yet another different developer's code come through your review pipeline. Mm-hmm. And so along these lines of these social aspects, what are the things that that have to be done differently for somebody who's reviewing every day? They're reviewing somebody they've code, never even met this person. I'm doing a review, and that's obviously a very different social situation than I'm working in a tight knit team of 7, and we all have had lunch 87 times together, and I'm reviewing the code of one of those folks. Like, what? How do you manage the differences between those different social contexts?
Yeah, I mean, and generally, when you're in that situation, you're also in the situation of some large team, lots of schedule pressure, people being thrown on all the time, and it's just pump stuff out as fast as you can. And there's not a lot of organizational concern about the actual quality of the software. It's just checking off those sprints, So yeah, I mean, you can't really get too in depth. You're at that point, you really are just making sure the world doesn't blow up. It's not the quality of your code review is definitely going down because you can't really take it to the level that you want to take it because hey, they're not going to do it. They don't have time. It's if you delay the code going in because you put 20 items on the code review that this person doesn't even understand, then you have management and people, just in different teams, different project leaders, being like, why isn't this feature being marked off right now, And so you gotta be like, well, I can't hold up the process. I can't really connect all these people and mentor them. I gotta really choose what's really important, is it going to break everything or not? And you really have to just let stuff go.
So you're saying that basically the further you are kind of in the organizational social network from where these changes are, just that necessarily limits the depth and value of the code review.
Yeah, I guess in my experience, when I was in that situation, I was also in this thing that was just so large, and there wasn't that organizational focus on quality. It was focused on marking off features as fast as you possibly can. And so it's like, if the people above you don't care enough, then you can't do that level of code review because no one's going to support you. That was the situation I was in there. So that's my experience. So I don't have a really good experience to relate. It's just like
that's interesting. Like I'm still trying to figure out how exactly to crack that particular problem as well. If you have, it's kind of like I think Bill. I keep referring to Bill a lot, but he likes to tell a story about how one of the things that he'll do when discussing projects and the health of the code base of a project and how to go about building that project is he'll say they'll say, okay, yeah, but we don't really want to write tests. So Bill said, all right, well, that'll be 20% more for my services.
That's great.
And he does, to what degree and how exactly that's delivered, I have no idea. But the point of that story is to provide that shock value of helping to understand that there are things that we do because that seem like they are wasteful to someone who is paying for them, but they don't realize how costly it is without those services and those efforts in place. And code review and code quality is one of those where if you're doing that all the time, if you're responsible for maintaining and working in that code base and know the overhead that starts to build over time, it's a no-brainer that having those code quality checks in place are going to be vital to continue to keep moving. It's that idea of velocity that I mentioned earlier, but we hear about velocity in agile development, and it is ignorantly encoded in those processes as a function of past performance of a developer and completely ignores the fact that that number will go down over time no matter what anyone does, because of the nature of the complexity of software and systems.
Yeah.
It's
just as it gets big, there will necessarily be less on each piece. There'll be less attention on each piece. It's unavoidable.
Right. And having this situation that Chris described of having folks upstream who are only concerned about like how many features we can crank out and start making money off of, or solving problems with. I mean, I get that that is their primary concern as part of their job, but yeah, if you don't have support there, like what's the point? At code review at a certain point.
And those are the same people that have that idea that, oh, the more people I add, the faster and more features I can get done. And it's like bodies are cheap. Let's just do it. And they just and yeah, they are just wasting money, but they don't want to hear it. And again, it depends on the relationship with the client. So you're talking about bill and talking about negotiating contracts, and I'm talking about experience where I'm just one in a sea of
Right.
contract workers.
Even if you're there like at an architect level responsible for reviewing code of lots of people, you're at such a big organization that there's 50 other of you that are also right.
Nobody cares about me. Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, we got 50 other architects who can review this code too, right? So I want to tell a story at two different ends of this spectrum of in-depth review and tying back to the social part. One is like my role here in our organization is mostly to work with people here to get really good at the most important, most difficult things. And so we're the kind of organization where we tend to look at code as a group. We tend to like poke holes at each other's code or ask, is that really the right way to do that? Let's code it both ways and then like argue, not in the sense of like disliking argue, but talk through in depth how this code should be. And that's kind of part of our culture. Okay. And in that, like, yeah, I mean, it's still like just being, obviously to be nice to other people, but in our culture with a tight group of people, although we're growing fast, it's hard to stay tight when you grow fast. We have a culture of really going in depth on bits of review. And yeah, just be basically nice, but we don't worry much about, hey, I pointed out that this code might be imperfect. This person might be offended, right? Like you're kind of not allowed to work here, essentially, if you're going to take offense at someone else noticing that your work is imperfect. Because all of our work is always imperfect. It's just that's what sort of like a boutique consultancy type people who want to be in this role of working on the hard problems and like, figuring out the hard stuff, end up being the kind of people who are okay talking about the merits of some code, even if it's code they wrote. Now I want to tell you about the opposite end of the spectrum. Done any open source? Open source is brutally tough to do any kind of code review because you don't know anything about the person on the other end. And you have to be so careful because you don't want to drive someone away with your code review, right? In open source, your review of something, they might just give up. They might be offended at your comment, or they might just like never respond again. I just abandoned the PR. So with open source, it's all about find the bits of good, even if it's kind of a rough branch, and look for ways to like encourage continued participation.
Well, it's worse than that even, because not only is the relationship between you and the committer one of complete black box situation, but that communication channel between the two of you is publicly scrutinized after the fact and forever.
You don't have the option, like you were saying, Paul, of if it just has a lot of trouble, I won't. You said you won't just like type a bunch. You'll like setting aside, say, hey, let's talk about this code together. You don't really have that as clearly when it's just a branch a PR sitting out there on GitHub.
Yeah.
Here we go. I'm gonna publish an offender's comment here briefly. Yeah, it is a difficult, because the unknown nature of the open source relationship makes it difficult because you just don't know. unfortunately, for better or worse, we have often talked about how it'd be great to be if we did more open source, but we keep finding ourselves with a bunch of customers that want to pay us to do things, and so it's been difficult to do. We have published some things open source, but we have not yet been responsible for a large open source thing where we're getting a bunch of of submissions by folks out there. But yeah, I've participated kind of outside of our core work on that kind of thing, and it is really challenging.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we at? I'm going back to our list of what we promised. Okay, we've covered almost everything we promised, but how about, we got an easy one. What code should be reviewed in a project? Like, does the test code get reviewed? Does the E2E test code get reviewed? Do like the scripts that run the build get reviewed, or does only the application kind of mainline code get reviewed? And like, what differences are there in what code gets reviewed in what way?
I feel like all of it needs to be reviewed on some level.
Yeah, well,
it's a good starting point. I like that.
That's a good starting statement. The next thing I think of, though, is, okay, I'm literally the only one who even knows how Bitbucket pipeline works on my project.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Paul, do you ever go outside your project for review? I've done that. I've had projects where I'm working on alone, and every once in a while, I'll take some chunk of code and I'll ask somebody else who works here, who doesn't even work on the project, hey, can you just like look this over for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ideally all of it would. Yeah, I think ideally all of it would be the right answer. I think there's just a hard reality, and this actually kind of goes back to the NX conversation. Like when you start getting at scale of, I've got 5 different teams, like, okay, so we've got some commits that are coming in that only affect the overall architecture or some core libraries. Who do I get to review that versus someone who's committing like a business line change? As you scale, it's not just what gets reviewed, but who does the reviewing.
Yeah.
That is kind of like very intimately tied to the what gets reviewed question. So I don't know how to separate the two. To me, it's what gets reviewed is, well, who's available that has something helpful to say about the commit in question.
I think that at a larger org, there's more reliably somebody else who has the right skills to be able to review anything. In a smaller org, there might not be. Oddly enough, sometimes in a little section of a large org can start to look like a small one in that way, right? It can be, well, yeah, we know that at this megacorp we're working for, there are definitely people here who have deep expertise in this code. The problem is those people aren't assigned to this project, and within the confines of how this organization works, even though that person probably works literally down the hall on the same floor, it's just not feasible to get, an hour of their time spent on this project reviewing this part of the code.
Right. So where's the charge line?
Yeah, right. Like we don't have a billing code for that person to help for 1 hour on this project. Sorry. Right. So aside from the kind of just the what code gets reviewed, and of course I think we all agree ideally all of it, but sometimes not quite all of it. I think there are important differences though. I have been known to let a lot more things slide on like test code than on the production code that's under test. I have felt at times that it's, there's only so many hours in the day. Let's allocate more of them to making the code that's actually going to deliver the value directly, and less of that toward the test code. You can go too far with that. If your test code gets too bad, it becomes unmaintainable. But I know that we've helped a lot of customers with Cypress, Protractor, that kind of thing, writing kind of complicated tests. What have we been advising in terms of the level of attention there? I'm going to feature. I know who donates. Hi, Tony. Feature another incoming comment here who points out that even in a big org, knowing who to review is still hard. So it does not easily go away.
Yeah, we on our project, that point that Tony just made about those difficult cross-cutting concerns and large orgs and whatnot, we actually specifically will create different kinds of branches that different kinds of commits can go into that will roll up eventually in the process. And depending upon which branch you're committing to, will kind of automatically select a team of reviewers that are capable of reviewing that particular type of change. Now, that's still a very manual. The committer has to know like which kind of branch to submit their change to. But at the very least, there is a mechanism that can help to guide that effort a little bit. And so we do exactly that on those cross-cutting concerns. We'll pick someone who is from the product team plus one framework maintainer to review that particular commit that comes in.
So Paul, we actually do a version of this for our in-house project, which is our big set of example code and architecture example code, in that there's parts of the machinery that have like a big pile of bash scripting that are kind of my problem that I end up reviewing. But then everything that has to do with what and how we actually teach, you end up reviewing. And we occasionally have to like take a branch and either each both look at part of it, or even like get the person say, hey, could you like instead do two different branches? Could you do one branch where you like do this machinery adjustment, and then and then I'll do some reviewing and testing that Kyle, and then the other branch where you propose that we teach it differently, and then Paul's going to go review that and work with you. So like,
well,
even as a smaller organization, we're not immune to having to do that move. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then we have another layer of it, which is, and then prior to like an official, nitty gritty, fine grained review, there's we literally pull it up as a team to kind of get team buy-in. I think that's probably more of an artifact of the nature of our project being that the code base is the product.
Right.
For our instructors to use in active teaching the class.
Right.
But even so, like that, our code base gets exposed to like just extreme scrutiny, and changes have this tiered experience, like you said. Of first, we have to like as a group kind of come to an agreement that like this is a good approach, and then if I see something about how that is structured or how the example itself operates that I feel could be a little bit better, then I'll further follow on with additional comments, and then if there's any architectural changes to the tooling system itself, and then you have additional layer there. So I think that has worked really well for us, but then that tends to fall into the trap of our changes take a long time to percolate out the other end as a result.
Yeah, and actually related to that, so for example, GitHub has a file called, I think it's owners or code owners. I think maybe either will work. So you can specify, like for this directory or even for this file, who are the people that have to review changes here. And what we just talked about, Paula, is past that. It's like, well, within this file, in fact, within a given lines of code, the type of change you're making on the line of code might affect who needs to review it. Like, the granularity, literally within a line of code, some kinds of changes in that line have to go through one review process and some go through another, which is kind of the extreme case. Well, I have one last big topic, unless there's any more on this one. So this is the one we promised at the end. What are some ways that code review can go awry? What can go wrong with code review? So for anybody who makes it this far in, this might be the best part. I don't know.
I got some words. If Chris, you want to go first? I got some things.
I mean, I guess the only thing that comes to mind really is, if the process holds up things too long and things are saying they're getting stale and conflicts, and
you can fail the ship, right?
Yeah.
You can fail the ship because just everything got stuck in code review. What else?
Well, I would start by saying that like a good coder is not necessarily a good code reviewer.
Yeah.
And
Right.
like you can see the Dunning-Kruger effect like in action in the realm of having a bad code reviewer in
Yeah.
action. It is
Absolutely.
some of the worst experiences I have had at clients has been when we have someone who I would deem as a mid-level developer in the position of code review.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
is the worst situation for me. Typically, what happens is they're in the bottom of that Dunning-Kruger curve, and they know just enough to be dangerous. Like they have awareness of their favorite processes, their favorite tools, their favorite frameworks, their favorite opinions, but they've not been around long enough to know a full breadth of experience of alternative ideas, approaches, techniques, tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
and have yet to view the world as a continuous series of trade-offs.
Yeah.
And have typically yet to develop the grace, humility, whatever you want to call it, of realizing that like that your individual opinion is not what you're getting paid to do as a code reviewer.
Right.
And so in those situations when we have that person at the helm of code review, you end up with I have one person in mind that I'm thinking of in particular who kind of like did all of the things wrong. They made other developers on their team cry. They made bad architectural decisions that cost the company an entire month's worth of labor. They ended up having a process that would just regularly break the code that ended up getting released. And furthermore, they would not let the actual architects and senior developers in the room actually affect how this process worked.
Ouch.
And the net result, like I was saying, it led to just tons and tons of cost. But unfortunately, like there at this particular client, there was no one in a position to be able to challenge this person and the authority that they were trying to wield. And it just ended up making it so that absolutely nothing got done.
So I think there can be even worse.
Okay.
I think that a sufficiently bad code review could drive away really great people who you'd prefer to keep working with. And like I said, that's really easy in the open source world, where one wrong comment, the person can just abandon their PR and never come back. But even inside a commercial organization, yeah, it is a fine and difficult line to do the right kind of feedback to help the whole team improve. Yet to maintain a good human relationship with the person on the other end of the comment. And there is a lot of opportunity for things to go awry there. And Paul, it sounds like that was happening in spades in the scenario you're reflecting on, and the person who was causing it didn't mind.
we had to go behind and talk this developer out of not quitting. Because they were a junior developer. They just got started on at this organization, and this was their first exposure to code review, and they just felt that they were completely incapable of doing the job afterwards.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case. They were just subjected to a particularly harsh and not helpful code reviewer.
You have to have that culture that it's totally fine. All code is broken, so comments about this code being broken, they mean you're a good person because you made some progress, not you're a bad person because you're imperfect.
Right.
How else could it go awry? Just getting stuck and not shipping, angering people drive away, and fracturing relationships. Those are pretty bad ways. I guess the other way, if it just doesn't happen, you can have people that just they're so frustrated by the process, they just press approve to every commit that comes by. They don't even want to look at it. They don't want to think about it.
I've been guilty of the other end of that. Not seriously.
The recipient or the doer, though, Paul?
Other axis. I've been the bottleneck of progress and have held the line to a point of endangering a product before, and trying to help get started with some practices, any practices, but not like we were talking about earlier, not having that support upstream of like, yes, having some quality here is important. I was just seen as a barrier to progress, as opposed to someone who was trying to make a better product for folks. And so in that regard, it's code review was gone awry in that at the end of the day, they would have literally been better off without any, because they end up with no software as opposed to a little bit of high quality software.
Yeah, I guess the ugly truth is that bad software is actually, in many cases, better than no software at all.
Right.
Depending on the org, right? I think Chris was talking about like a medical domain, and I guess I'd prefer that the product not ship if it's not sufficiently good. But in many of the commercial domains that we work in, the organization is objectively better off if the software is bad than they are if they just don't have it at all.
I mean, there's a lot of big companies shipping lots of bad software, and somehow the world's going around.
But they all improve when they engage us. So, well, I have nothing else on the list. Anything else on the code review topic, or are we able to wrap up? I think we're done. It. So, it took us an hour and first 15 was other things. So an hour and a half of things we had to say about code review. So I don't know how many people will make it all the way through the recording, but for those that do, thank you for watching.
See you in a while.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.